The message is perseverance, and it's a useful one in this story from Burely Smith. The Korean War, the Forgotten War, as it's aptly called, in case you needed reminding, came hot after the Second World War and was fought on the Korean peninsula in the early 1950s between communist-backed forces in the north, Western-backed forces in the south. Among those who saw service in that conflict was Burely Smith, a 21-year-old junior third mate on the SS Meredith Victory, or the Ship of Miracles as it came to be known. Burely is now 92 and resides in Miami, but his daughter Ruth, who listens to this programme, told us about him, and he very decently joins us because it's 3:30 in the morning there. Burely, you were 21. How come you found yourself on board the SS Meredith Victory?
Well, we had just graduated from the United States Merchant Marine Academy on Long Island, Kings Point, after a 4-year course, and we came out with our naval ensign's commissions and third engineer's licenses, depending on which course we'd followed at school. I was the deck side of the course, so I came out with a third mate's license. And the week we graduated, June 1950, was the week that the Korean War started, when the South was invaded by the North Koreans. That happened on June 25th, 1950. And our forces, the American troops who were stationed in South Korea and the South Korean forces, were pushed back very quickly to what was called the Pusan perimeter. What happened back in the States, Truman decided that the United States, actually it was a UN decision, and the UN decided that South Korea needed to be defended. And immediately, Truman marshaled our naval and our military forces that were in Japan already and poured them into the Pusan perimeter. We were in New York. I was driving a taxi for a couple of weeks after I got out of school just to get some money, because we had been making $65 a month at school for about 4 years, and there wasn't much left over after paying for uniforms and things. So I got a call from Moore McCormick Line in New York, one of the commercial companies, saying that we've got a ship that the military has just chartered. It's being taken out of mothballs down in the boneyard in the James River in Norfolk, Virginia, and we need a crew. Get down there. So I hopped the train.
And off you went.
Off I went. And 47 of us, that was the standard crew size, took the ship empty down through the Panama Canal from Norfolk up to the Oakland Army Base, where we loaded tanks and bridge building equipment and sailed off to Tokyo.
I'm going to have to girdle the earth very quickly, because you went to Tokyo. Your job, of course, was to get supplies to troops on the peninsula. But when you arrived in Hungnam Port, you saw... Well, tell me what you saw when you arrived.
Well, we'd been in Korea for 6 months at that point, done the Incheon invasion, which was the first really exciting thing that we were involved in. And then as we had pushed, MacArthur and his group had pushed the Chinese, the North Koreans, all the way back up to the border with China in North Korea. The Chinese were very nervous about this, and by December of 1950 were pouring in across the border and forced our people, the Marines and the Army and the other Turks, the British. There were 20 nations involved beside the United States in defending the South. And the troops who had gotten up to the Chosin Reservoir were pushed back to the east coast of Korea by the Chinese and the North Koreans. And they were trapped. 100,000 of our people were trapped on the coast. And with them came these hordes of North Korean civilians, men, women, and children carrying whatever they could. And the weather was simply horrible. It was blizzard conditions all over North Korea. It was one of the coldest places I've ever been, even though you're only at the 40th, 50th parallel there. And the dock was crowded with 100,000. Well, by the time we got there were only about 20,000 refugees left. And the Chinese were on the hills all around the port, within about a mile or two of the port, waiting to take over everybody they could find on the beach. So they had all of the military and the refugees crammed on the beach, waiting to get out.
And of course, the ship that you were on, captained by Captain LaRue, was really designed to take, I think, 60 people. But you took on how many of those refugees made it on board your ship?
Well, I've never been sure, Richard, how they counted them, but the estimate was 14,000.
Hang on, so a crew of 60 all of a sudden were augmented by 14,000 refugees.
Actually, we were about 47 in the crew, and the ship was about 7,000 tons gross registered tonnage. That was the inside capacity, not weight. And if you compare that to the other ship in history that carried a huge number of people, it was the Queen Mary, the number one, not number two, who carried about the same number of people when she was a troop ship during the World War II between New York and Southampton. But when you consider that the Queen Mary had a gross tonnage of 10 times what we did, to be comparable, she would have had to carry 140,000.
So you had Korean refugees. Presumably, language was an issue. What sort of condition were those people in? What were they like? Who were they?
These were folks who'd been on the road anywhere from a week to 2 weeks, fleeing before the Chinese who were coming south. They were carrying their babies on their backs. Korea was an extremely poor country at that time, so they were in not rags, but very simple clothing. They had no food. They'd had no water. They were eating snow because the countryside was covered with ice and snow. They were desperate just to stay ahead of the Chinese because the rumor was that the Chinese had said they were going to behead any children they found at home who weren't fighting alongside the Chinese. They were going to behead them. So it helped to get the troops, our troops who were escaping, encumbered by all of these refugees.
Amazing story. And then Captain LaRue makes a decision to take them on board, then plots a course, courtesy of minesweepers, through extremely dangerous waters. You have 14,000 extra passengers who obviously need to do what people do, and that leaves the ship in all sorts of undescribable state. But of those 14,000 refugees, many are now settled in America. And I think one of them, in fact, two of them, ended up being the parents of the president of South Korea today.
I discovered about 4 or 5 years ago that President Moon Jae-in of South Korea, the current president, was the offspring, the child of two of the young refugees that we had saved back in those days. Of course, we had no communication with any of these 14,000 because none of us spoke Korean and none of them spoke English. When I discovered that Moon was the offspring of one of our two of our passengers, I wrote to him and I said, "You'll be interested to know that your parents and I were on a cruise together back in 1950." And I got the most wonderful letter back from him inviting us, to my wife and me, to come over to Korea to visit the monument that's been built to our ship. They've got the most magnificent, huge monument down on the island of Kojido where we delivered these folk. And we had a wonderful reception and traded flags that we got from the U.S. Capitol in Washington. And they're marvelous people.
And also Captain LaRue, who after the war became a Benedictine monk. There's now a cause, isn't it, to have him beatified and perhaps eventually canonized for this extraordinary humanitarian effort, unequaled by anything.
Yes, we were just deposed by the tribunal that's preparing the cause for submission to the Vatican later this year, hopefully. And there are only two of us officers of the ship who are still alive in our 90s now. The other one is a classmate of mine who was an engineer on the ship, who claims the reason we've reached this advanced stage in good health is that he was down in the engine room during all of this going on, distilling extra pure water so that we could live forever. But yes, LaRue was a marvelous, very understated captain who just told the military when we got up we were among the last ships to leave Hung Nam with the refugees. About 100,000 had been taken out by over 200 ships that were up there helping to get the troops and the material and the refugees out. And LaRue just told the military, fill us up, we'll take as many as we could. So we mates were down in the holds with these refugees as they clambered aboard, making them stand in each space, pushing them into the wings of the hold so that we could get as many as possible on board. And we filled the main deck with them. If you've seen the pictures on either Meredith Victory or Ship of Miracles, there's some photographs of what the ship looked like.
It's an amazing story. Burely Smith, thank you so much for sharing it with us. You're listening to Saturday Live. We're here until 10:30. If you have any comments, do get in touch. You can text on 84844, email on saturdaylive@bbc.co.uk, or you can tweet at BBC Radio 4 with the hashtag BBC Saturday Live.